Welcome to Athletes OnBalance, where we talk to athletes, coaches, and experts about mental health in sports. This is a stigma-free zone for inner thoughts and outer conversations. We're helping athletes and anyone with mental health challenges perform at their best, both on and off the field.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Athletes on Balance. I'm Walt Norley, your host, the founder and CEO of On Balance Health. Today, I'm honored to be joined by someone whose life work has led to developing one of the premier sports science programs in college athletics, Chris Casola. So, Chris, welcome. I'm going to have to read your bio. It's extensive, all right? I didn't get a chance to memorize it. I just want to let you know. So
Yeah.
I'm going to be clipping my...
You-
So Chris is the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Champion Performance at Liberty University, where he oversees student-athlete welfare and performance across all the NCAA Division I programs. He has over 30 years of experience in athletic performance and sports medicine. Chris leads today a multidisciplinary team focused on holistic development, addressing the physical, mental, and spiritual needs of all student athletes. In this episode, and this is why I'm excited, Chris and I have gotten to know each other. We're exploring sports science as it relates to that intersection, between mind, body, and spirit, and how, and this is Chris's world, how that applies to athletic performance optimization, how the measurables, which Chris has many, from neuroscience combined with recent data coming from the mental health side, can predict recovery, injury prevention, and obviously competitive performance. Additionally, which I think is a great add-on with having you here, Chris, is the element of faith as it applies to all that as well. So again, welcome and thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Walt. Great to be here. Great to be with you.
So let's start, this is a mental health program, athletics, obviously everything that you do applies to it because you can't separate the mind and the body. There is a crisis. I've had other professionals on here, and so they're certainly not my words. There's a crisis going on within collegiate athletics from a mental behavioral health perspective. Numbers that I've been exposed to, and I know you have, anywhere from maybe 10, 15% of student athletes in a case, clinical, non-clinical sports psych at any given period of time, all the way, I've been exposed to university, all the way up to 50%. So the numbers aren't trivial. What's your perspective on why there's a crisis at this level, and what are the primary drivers?
That's a great question. One I think one I think that needs to be answered. I think if we're ever going to be able to get ahead of this situation, certainly within our athletic departments, is where responsible to do. We really need to figure out what's causing it. I think we all have our assumptions as to what's causing it. I think you wouldn't have to look far before the topic of social media, cell phones, and just a generation that's been raised in that realm. What they're dealing with, what they've been exposed to from even a young age. I think the more I learn about science and neuroscience and trying to figure out what somebody who has low levels of anxiety or even depression deal with, I think you have to look at not only the things that they've been exposed to, but the things that they're exposed to now, and then how are they able to regulate themselves, right? And so I think what we see a lot I think what we're seeing a lot of in the realm of mental health is um, a lot of dysregulation, right? A lot of folks that have really the inability to kind of waver in and out of stressful situations and kind of handle those things head on. Maybe like some would say, well, like we used to be able to. Again, we could look at the science of how the brain develops and maybe how the brain is not quite developing in our younger student athletes or student athletes that are coming in, and certainly that plays a role in um, different aspects of the brain if they're not developing the way that they used to. Well, those aspects of the brain help to navigate, what we would have considered, potentially normal stresses, and those become like abnormal stresses because they can't, um, they can't navigate those things. So I think that's a lot of it. I think there's also the added, social pressures that come into play with exposure to a world that's for our student athletes is very, very vast and very big. And I don't think for you and I, certainly as we were growing up, our world wasn't quite that big. And so these kids are trying to navigate problems that we never even knew existed.
17 to 23-year-old people, right? That not only have the social media world that, you've got the bullying element that comes, and they're all, essentially some more than less addicted to what people are saying, even when coaches and everybody around them says, put it down, put it down. But now you have the NIL and you have the transfer portal world. And, let's talk about that, right? Because you have firsthand experience. You know, kids, young people moving from transferring one time, and then you have second times and three times. How do they adjust to all these different environments and culture and stay, focused
Yeah,
and healthy?
yeah. Well, I think in a lot of cases they don't, right? I mean, we all used to, we see freshmen that come in and I don't know the number off the top of my head, but there's there's a pretty scientific number of days that it takes for a person to integrate into a new culture or a new community. It's somewhere, I think, in I'm going to get it wrong if I say it, but I think it's 100. There's a number out there that they've studied this, and so you would see this with freshmen. They'd come in, they'd be a little maybe homesick, and they're trying to get used to a new team, a new environment. And then finally they do, and they settle in, and they end up being thriving, individuals. Well, when you continue to disrupt that, um, that process, and you never kind of get into that groove, um, it really makes it tough. It really makes it tough to be at your best when you haven't really integrated into the community in which you're
Your
in.
just your teammates and the
Right.
ecosystem around your teammates. And so we're gonna get into the overarching sports science and the intersection details that you love. But go to the component first, because you just brought in the On Balance mental health program for measurable metrics. This world has been reactive, right? Right. It's been kind of acute management. How do you think that changes just on the mental health side of it? How does that move into proactivity?
One of the reasons one of the reasons why I feel like the On Balance tool is so valuable for us is because I think if anyone looked across an athletic department and they said, where are we feeling like we're a little bit behind in terms of just kind of how we're navigating something? I don't think anyone would say, well, it's knee injuries or it's even concussions anymore, or it's that we used to, and then we got better at diagnosing them, and we have more data and more research to show what the long-term effects of those things are. And I'm hopeful that the same happens with mental health. It has to. I think right now we're living off a very reactive, let's just kind of wait and see, and then kind of, you know, fix it as it gets here. But I think if we don't start to ask some questions, about why things are happening, really why things are happening, and then have an honest conversation about how to measure some of those things, how to fix some of those things. So, and I'll tell you, the resilience program we have started as fundamentally as a performance program. So it is a program that we've instituted here to help our student athletes have a little bit of an edge, a little bit of an advantage, and kind of help them in achieving peak performance. And it's basically three things. So we work on visual coordination, so binocular vision, where they're able to train their binocular vision. When you think of an athlete and you think of their vision, um, 80% of all the data that they take in is visual, and that informs their ability to make any type of cognitive decision. So very important, certainly on the field, also important in the classroom. So you know, understanding that the clearer the picture that the brain can get, the more information the brain can get and quicker, um, reduces static, could reduce a level of performance confusion, which could lead to performance anxiety, but also just lets them function better, on the field with better information.
So you have a measurement element,
Hmm.
right? And based on the results, if there's a deficiency, in one to the other,
Right?
then you have a strengthening program.
We do, we do,
Yeah.
and it's literally 5 to 10 minutes a day. An athlete can come in and they sit. We have a lab set up, and they can sit in front of the screen, and they now start working on. It's not a lens thing. It's not a visual, 20/20 thing, but it's how are my eyes working together? And they do these simple exercises with some glasses on that force them to kind of be a little bit stronger and a little bit more coordinated with their vision. And over time, we've seen significant improvement in
I
that.
love the example that you gave me when you were showing me this, where the receiver, turning to uh, look up and catch, and if he has a deficiency here on the one eye,
Sure.
that's likely compared to going on the other side with the right eye, hypothetically, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a tremendous example.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So that's the vision piece, and then the really the foundation of the program is our breathing piece, what we call power, as part of the program. And so what they're learning how to do is to breathe diaphragmatically. So when let's look at mental health for a minute. Let's look at regulation, and let's look at specifically anxiety. Um, what we found is, or what we see, and I think what science has proven is that the way you breathe, and the way you breathe when you're in a rested position, will determine the state of your autonomic nervous system, the part that kind of regulates your nervous system. And what we find is most of our athletes, most people, I would say, they don't um, they don't breathe in a way that puts them into what they call a parasympathetic state, which is a relaxed recovery kind of state. And they breathe very heavy chest breathers up in their shoulders. They don't use their diaphragm. They don't fill their lungs completely up. And so doing that in and of itself will keep a student athlete in somewhat of a sympathetic state all the time. So there's this sympathetic buzz. And so back to the beginning of our conversation, when I said dysregulation is also part of what we're dealing with in mental health. It's because we're really not created to live in a sympathetic state. A sympathetic state is what we need when it's time to run from the lion, so to speak. And that's a gift, and we need to be able to do that, but we're not supposed to live there. We're supposed to live in a parasympathetic state, go into a sympathetic state when we need it, right? Say a basketball player um, who just went up for a layup and got fouled, very sympathetic environment, thousands of fans screaming. Now they have to down regulate into a focused, state, more of a parasympathetic state to shoot their free throws. You can learn how to oscillate in and out of those moments by doing some of the training that we're doing with the lab.
Do you
Um,
use is there a way today, and maybe there's not, and as you know, I want to talk a little bit about the future, but is there a way to then correlate that with somebody improving their performance and you can quantify that?
that's a discussion we had really early on was, well, what are the things we can measure? Like if a baseball player practices his breathing, will his batting average go up? And that would be great if we could measure that, but there's so many factors that go into somebody's batting average,
Yeah.
or how they perform. What we do know is A plus B equals C, right? So what 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 is hard to equate is the specific metrics of, like I just said, the specific metrics of a batting average, or um, how many drop passes you have, or how many errors you had, fielding, and fielding, and things like that.
Let's talk a little bit about predictability, and things, physically you can predict. And let's go from coming from an injury, um, whether it was surgical. And I know there's different severity levels of an ankle sprain and a hamstring strain and, meniscus to an ACL. Um, do you have data that you're working with to start looking at those variables to see what kind of time outcomes for people to be physically the hamstrings at the level it should be? We're doing this stuff with mental health, as you know, right? It's our rod. Do you have that as part of your package right now on the recovery time of a given injury?
Any sports medicine team would have normative data. Um, you know, Most of us work from an electronic EMR system that would say that you could run reports on, you know, based on degree of injury for this body part, or degree of injury for that body part, what the average times were. And then there's plenty of normative data out there that would say typically a grade 2 this would take this long, and then we would look at those things. But there's an interesting concept, and this we were talked about a little bit of this last week, though, is uh, the difference between the target, which is what we're trying to treat, and then um, the obstacles that float around and in front of the target, right? And this is what's so interesting about mental health, both in terms of what leads to could potentially lead to an injury, even a musculoskeletal injury, and then the athlete's ability to make their way out of that or recover from that, right? And so as you see mental health, anxiety type disorders increase, you're also going to see some of this normative data that we said, oh, that's a 2 week injury, you know, piece of cake. Might not be a 2 week 2 week injury.
You you drew up on the board when I was with you, that nexus. Can you talk about that intersection of everything and why
Yep.
you think that's so important and how that's going to happen, right? Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
hard one. The
Right.
last one, the hardest
Right.
one.
So, and a lot of what we're talking about I have a 30-year background, working with student athletes, and as a frustrated clinician who has tried to get a lot of people better, but help them recover from things I felt like were really preventable. Um, so that always drives me, right? And so we talk a lot about. So the concept on the board was we're talking about the different aspects of a student athlete: the mental, the physical, the spiritual, emotional, and where do those things connect? What's the nexus of those things? Um, and you could shape it a couple different ways, but for our conversation that day, the way I saw it was looking at the autonomic nervous system, and someone's ability to self-regulate themselves, or be in a what we call coherence, not what we call, but what is called coherent state, to where they're kind of in the right mindset to allow them to function at a high capacity, whether that's in the game, or in a practice, or in a classroom, or in the weight room, whatever. Um, that ability to regulate your nervous system is probably what connects all parts of a person. And when that gets out of whack, when that gets a little bit dysregulated or that gets a little bit off, it's really hard to function at a high level in any area, let alone every area, you know?
So is that if you put that in a layman's speak, is that the ability to have all those things come together for focus and a focus that's is sustainable for
Yes.
the period of that performance?
Yeah. So what we talk about, what I didn't mention was the third part of our resilience program, um, is it is actually called focus, right? So it's use all those things, especially the breathing, to allow an athlete to learn how to be both calm and focused at the same time. Those are two different things. And a person who's able to be calm and focused at the same time probably has a really well regulated nervous system. And when that happens, now you can now you can operate at your potential in most every area of your life. So it's all connected.
You mentioned faith. So you've been at non-secular schools, and Liberty obviously is faith-based. Can you speak to the experience that you've had in what's different in being within a faith-based program that embraces it and integrates it into all the things we just discussed, right?
Yeah.
How do you think that again, go back to this chaotic world that the student athletes are living in right now with everything we mentioned prior? Can you speak to how you think that has a positive effect?
Yeah. You know, I think I'll answer it by what do I think the elements of or the benefits are of trying to operate an athletic program and having faith as part of it, a big part of it. And I think there's several things, but the first thing I always go to is identity, right? I think when you're settled on what identity is, and we tell our athletes all the time that, softball or baseball or basketball is what you play, it's not who you are, right? And so,
Great
um,
advice. Great
and
advice.
yeah, and so, in a faith-based ecosystem, where the question is who does God say you are, not who does TikTok say you are, and who does Instagram say you are, and who does the scoreboard say you are, and who do your circumstances say you are. And I really do believe that we try to live that, and I think we try to instill that for our student athletes. We still want to win. It's still important. A matter of fact, our in that faith construct, our performance and how we prepare for performance is our worship, right? So how we do what we do is important. The outcome, the outcome will take care of itself, and it doesn't win or lose, it doesn't determine who you are, because if your identity is caught up in whether you won or lost, some weeks you're a loser and some weeks you're a winner, you know, and that's not sustainable. And so I think the value for us is alignment with that. Um, and we don't, there's no question about that. And that means something different to all of our student athletes, and they're all on their own, faith journey. But the message is consistent, and the message is that's the construct which we recruit off of, and that's the construct off of how we develop our student athletes.
Well, you just used the word develop when you were saying that, you're all about performance and championship performance, but you're developing people. You're developing people to go out into the non-athletic world eventually, right? And that advice on identity, quite frankly, I think carries well beyond athletics.
Definitely.
It carries deeply with athletes, as you know, that identity crisis they have, especially when it's over. So
Definitely.
you're introducing something that um, a lot of programs don't at this point in time, and because of that, people have challenges when they hang up the cleats. So within all this, though, to get better, going down long term, clearly you need data to track, and then clearly the and this is the beauty of, I think, what's happening with AI, Chris, is that nobody has to do the analytics. The analytics are done. The ability to get the answers to all those variables being brought together, in a nexus to tell an outcome or show a pattern, right? It's probably. I mean, you look at you're focused on sports performance, sports science, and developing better human beings, but there's probably not, my opinion, and there's others. AI is probably the biggest impact is going to be in the healthcare industry, right?
We need to start looking upstream as far as we can. Um, I, Another thing that I wrote on the board, when you were here is we're very good, and athletics just historically is very good at trying to change behavior. Um, Thoughts and feelings are right above that, and those lead to behaviors, and we're really trying really hard to work on behaviors, but there's an entire person and an entire brain upstream of that thought, of that feeling, of that behavior that we can really look upstream, and maybe there's some things that we could be doing to that will fundamentally change the behavior versus just trying to attack downstream, trying to attack the behavior all the time.
Does that come from the neuroscience world?
Yes,
Yeah,
part of it does. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, but what are you detecting upstream, Chris? Are you detecting? Give me, if you don't mind, just give me an example of what you might detect that would help
Yeah,
with what the behavior becomes, right?
yeah. So biopsychosocial approach, right? Looking at biology, psychology, social, how are things in the body? You talk about gut health and sleep, and how are those things manifesting themselves into those downstream behaviors that we're seeing? And and how do we identify that and then fix those things upstream and watch the behavior just change? So looking at, it's a very, and we have great doctors, and they're very open to us looking at, different biomarkers and things. And we're just kind of at the cusp of this. And certainly in the private sector, people have taken this a lot further than what you see in the collegiate space. Um, and I think that could change, pretty simply. A lot of resources, available to that, and you have an ecosystem where you can monitor and control those things.
Let me ask some closing questions that I'd like to pose to all my guests, and I'm personally always interested in it. But so first, who's been the most inspirational person in your life, and why?
I'd have to first look at my parents. Um, I draw inspiration from a lot of people. I've worked with some really good coaches, and I typically pull pieces of inspiration from people. I don't. I'm human. They're human. I haven't found that person yet that has it all, and nor do I. Right? I tell my kids the same thing. Um, but I've learned. I get my ethic from my dad, and I get uh, my ability to ask why, I think, from my mom. Um, and so they've really, and they've poured into me a faith construct from a very young age, that I feel like has been invaluable, to me as I got through my career. So, um, but I find inspiration even from my own kids. You know, um, and again, I could sit here and think of 20 or 30 people that I've pulled inspiration from for different reasons.
It's great that you recognize that, and it's great you recognize that everybody has their values, that something you gravitate to. but clearly you're blessed to have good parents,
Very
and fortunate. Not everybody is. Look, you handle a lot. You manage a lot. You've got a lot of moving balls. As we said earlier, it is a chaotic world, and everybody that's sitting underneath you that you're focused on championship performance, but you oversee the health and wellness of a lot of people, right? What do you do to manage, the pressures of the work, and how do how do you optimize your performance to make sure you're good to go every day or every week?
Yeah. Um, a lot of different things, right? So I have to, and I haven't always got this right. I have to take care of myself physically, which I've been through periods in my life where I was taking care of others, taking care of others, taking care of others, and haven't taken great care of myself. So I do try to take care of myself, physically, spiritually. I think I think having a faith construct, and faith in Christ and faith in God, um, can be can be one of two different things. If it, it can become my greatest asset, but it can also become my greatest. It can push me and cause me tension if I'm not given the right attention to that. So incorporating, some of that growth, whether it's scripture reading or prayer and things like that. I also do the resilience program. I've,
Yeah.
I've
Oh, do you?
I do.
You're
I could tell you some anecdotal personal feedback just in regards to blood pressure reduction, and I've even had visual, stigmatism, and which is a pressure thing. I've had those things improve. Um, yeah, it's interesting. You can't really go on any social media these days and not see something about mindfulness and meditation, and well, quite honestly, the value in those things is because it's those things put you in a state where you're breathing correctly, and there's so much medicine, that the body can get from doing that and doing that consistently and correctly. So I tap into that. I don't just preach about it. I actually
practice. You
actually
practice.
do it. I actually do it myself.
Just talking to you, whether we're on this or we're, on the telephone, it's really insightful. And thank you for sharing all that. Thank you for sharing with our audience. And I want to thank all of our followers for joining Chris and myself today and their continued support. I'm Walt Norley, and thanks for joining us.